Boker Tov,
But
Shalom.
Boker Tov, Shalom Roda.
And how are you all happy and settled in Chicago?
That's for later. For now,
Okay.
for now we have to get started on
I
our
know.
study.
I just haven't had a chance to
What's on
say
the
it.
Zoom
Yeah.
link? You see the Zoom icon at the bottom.
Part of the joy of Sukkot is accepting and embracing the imperfections in life.
Click on that.
Oh, good.
Realize you're never going to find a perfect etrog, but you can find an etrog that glorifies your relationship with the Holy One. Realize that in a sukkah, little bits of schach may fall into your soup. Realize that a little wind and rain may affect your climate control. Realize that there is no door. Accept it and embrace it. Realize that sometimes it will be raining and you can't be out in the sukkah. And you can shake your finger at the heavens and say, Holy One, I tried. You're really making this impossible. But I'll be back tomorrow. I'll wait today the sky's clear so I can come out and enjoy this intimate time together. But if not today, then tomorrow. In short, the many podcasts and essays that I've been enjoying related to Sukkot remind me that in a world that Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, whose scroll we read during Sukkot, even though Ecclesiastes says, look, there's nothing that you will accomplish that will solve the problem of mortality. Nevertheless, even if you can't reach, I believe Rabbi Sachs calls the Ashrei state of perpetual bliss, you can reach for simcha, for moments of absolute joy. So we'll try to snatch a few of those moments this morning in an imperfect world where Tomas is not holding down the fort yet because he's delayed by rain. And I welcome those who are in the room. I wish I could see your faces more clearly. Mo, perhaps you can help figure out a way to pan the room or otherwise let people introduce themselves. And on the roster today, we have 4 people who said that they would probably be here to present prepared material. And Amy, I see your hand is raised, and as soon as you bring us your commentary and blessings, I'll start to work with those who have signed up to make presentations. Miriam, Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom. You know, we just finished the Torah, and at the very end, to tie up all the loose ends, you know, because we're people of tying up strings, I just want to read you a very brief commentary from the Midrash on, you know, at the very end, there's the chance to bless the Jewish people for all space and time. I know you're going into Ecclesiastes, but I just want to finish up the actual Torah. And well, so
don't jump the gun on Simchas Torah, because we still have
no. This is the okay. But anyway, so there's a decision of who will bless.
What about our saying our blessing for studying Torah first?
Okay. Can you do that? Say the blessing for studying Torah.
Baruch atah Adonai. Okay, I'll wait for me. Baruch atah
thank you. So the question comes: who will bless the Jewish people for all space and time? And so Adam says, I am greater than you because I was created directly from Hashem, but you were born from parents. And Moshe humbly replies, you lost your greatness when you sinned, but the rays of glory which God awarded me have never been forfeited. Noah says, I am greater than you because I was saved from the flood and became the forefather of all humanity. And Moshe humbly replies, you saved yourself, but not your generation. Not only did I save myself, but when God wanted to destroy my generation after the sin of the golden calf, I saved them as well. Abraham says, I am greater than you. I was hospitable to every traveler. Moshe humbly replies, my deeds were greater, for I fed the Jewish people who are circumcised. Moreover, you lived near inhabited places whence you could obtain food, while I fed my people in the wilderness with bread from heaven. Yitzhak replied, I am greater than you. I inclined my neck on the altar and I envisioned the Shekinah. Moses replied, but your eyes were dimmed by the sight. I was able to speak to the Shekinah face to face, and my eyes retained their strength. Yaakov says, I wrestled with an angel and overcame him. Moses humbly replied, you wrestled with one angel in your domain, the earth, but I ascended to heaven, the angels' domain, and there I defeated a host of them, for they wanted to destroy me rather than let me have the Torah. Hashem said, because Moshe is closer to me than all these other tzaddikim, his blessings will be the most beneficial. Therefore, let him bless the Jews throughout space and time.
Thank you.
Amen. It's
So
a nice,
we've reached
cute
into
story.
the basket of Torah and Midrash. I quoted some Ketuvim, Kohelet. Now we should probably jump towards the basket that we have not yet dipped into, that of the prophets, because just as Kohelet is associated with Sukkot, so is the Haftarah for today, a beacon and a light for understanding Sukkot and where it is in our relationship. Beth has volunteered to give us some drash on Zechariah and even sent along a request that I get the right study sheet. So I will get that right now, and I will try to bring that up. Beth, please unmute and prepare to teach us some Torah.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. I know at Romemu, and I don't know why, we typically do not read and study the Haftarah on Shabbat, and I have no idea why. At my conservative shul in Ohio, we do. And
2.5 hours, we don't want to make it 3.
could everyone stop talking for a second, please, if that's possible?
That was actually an answer, Beth, that it's time considerations, the length of the service.
Oh, well, we just keep going. Anyway, you know, lunch will still be there at 12:35. At any rate, the Haftarah for the first day of Sukkot is the last chapter from the prophet Zechariah, chapter 14, and it anticipates a siege of Jerusalem by all nations who are sent by God. And this siege has a terrible effect on the city and its inhabitants. But then God does come to the rescue. God causes the Mount of Olives to split in half along an east-west fault line. God also causes a cessation of normal daylight and moonlight, and instead a new Yom Echad of neither day nor night arises in some kind of light. People and animals alike are afflicted with some kind of rotting of their flesh and organs. And ultimately, the besieging nations are defeated, and the remnants of those nations come to worship God in Jerusalem and celebrate Sukkot. And during that celebration, all the pails and utensils are inscribed holy to the Lord, and the bells on the horses are inscribed holy to the Lord. So what I'd like to do, and I think we can get through this really quickly if we have a fluent Hebrew reader, I'd like us to go ahead and actually read Zechariah so we can see what the text says. Do we have a volunteer to read?
If there's no volunteer, you can always call on me, Beth.
Asher Chaim, please read.
So the Hebrew and the English are both up there, and please follow in the language of your choice. Shall I read fairly quickly? Hine yom ba l'Adonai v'chulak shelalech b'kirbech v'yasafti et kol hagoyim el Yerushalayim למלחמה ונלכדה העיר ונשסו הבתים והנשים תשכבנה ויצא חצי העיר בגולה ויתר העם לא יכרת מן העיר ויצא אדוני ונלחם בגויים ההם כי יום הילחמו ביום קרב ועמדו רגליו ביום ההוא על הר הזיתים אשר על פני ירושלים מקדם ונבקע הר הזיתים מחציו מזרחה וימה גיא גדולה מאוד ומש חצי ההר צפונה לחציו נגבה ונסתם גיא הרי כי יגיע גיא הרים אל עצל ונסתם כאשר נסתם מפני הרעש בימי עוזיה מלך יהודה ובא אדוני אלוהי כל קדושיו עמך והיה ביום ההוא לא יהיה אור יקרות וקיפאון והיה יום אחד הוא יוודע לאדוני לא יום ולא לילה והיה לעת ערב יהיה אור והיה ביום ההוא יצאו מים חיים מירושלים חציים אל הים הקדמוני וחציים אל הים האחרון בקיץ ובחורף יהיה והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד יסוב כל הארץ כערבה מגבע לרימון נגב ירושלים ורעמה וישבה תחתיה למשער בנימין עד מקום שער הראשון עד שער הפנים ומגדל חננאל עד יקבי המלך וישבו בך וחרם לא יהיה עוד וישבה ירושלים לבטח וזאת תהיה המגפה אשר יגוף אדוני את כל העמים אשר צבאו על ירושלים המק בשרו והוא עומד על רגליו ועיניו תימקנה בחוריהן ולשונו תימק בפיהם והיה ביום ההוא תהיה מהומת אדוני רבה בהם והחזיקו איש יד רעהו ועלתה ידו על יד רעהו וגם יהודה תילחם בירושלים ואוסף חיל כל הגויים סביב זהב וכסף ובגדים לרוב מאוד וכן תהיה מגפת הסוס הפרד הגמל והחמור וכל הבהמה אשר יהיה במחנות ההמה כמגפה הזאת והיה כל הנותר מכל הגויים הבאים על ירושלים ועלו מדי שנה בשנה להשתחוות למלך אדוני צבאות ולחוג את חג הסוכות והיה אשר לא יעלה מאת המשפחות הארץ אל ירושלים להשתחוות למלך אדוני צבאות ולא עליהם יהיה הגשם ואם משפחת מצרים לא תעלה ולא באה ולא עליהם תהיה המגפה אשר יגוף אדוני את הגויים אשר לא יעלו לחוג את חג הסוכות. זאת תהיה חטאת מצרים וחטאת כל הגויים אשר לא יעלו לחוג את חג הסוכות. ביום ההוא יהיה על מסילות הסוס קודש לאדוני, והיה הסירות בבית אדוני כמזרקים לפני המזבח. והיה כל סיר בירושלים וביהודה קודש לאדוני צבאות, ובאו כל הזובחים ולקחו מהם ובישלו בהם, ולא יהיה כנעני עוד בבית אדוני צבאות ביום ההוא.
Thank you, Asher Chaim. There's a lot in this Haftarah, obviously. And in a quick reply to those who are asking for a source sheet of me, I don't have one. Asher Haim very kindly pulled the Sefaria sheet together on my behalf, so you will have to seek it from him. There are so many things in this Haftarah that I find fascinating, and it's hard to pick just a few. But I'm going to focus on three that really jump out at me. And the first one is this amazing phenomenon of alterations of our natural world. You know, of course, we have the Mount of Olives being split, and we have streams flowing out of Jerusalem. But we also have an alteration of the normal lights that we experience, daylight and moonlight. And it's almost as if daylight and moonlight are no longer separated from creation. And instead, God has moved the world back in time to that very first primordial light that God created on the very first day of creating our world. And reading this, I just think, how amazing would it be to be there in Jerusalem, to live and breathe during this time, and to witness this primordial first light that is not being cast by the sun or the moon, and, you know, the celestial bodies that we're so accustomed to living with. Jay, you have a comment?
I don't know if I should wait till the end of your stay. I assume we'll have a chance to talk about this. I can wait till you're done.
Okay, great.
Yeah, why don't I do that?
Okay. The second thing that jumps out at me in a primary kind of way is the inclusion of horses in the beings that will suffer from this plague. Horses are my first love among the animal world. I love other animals too, but horses are my very first love. And they are truly noble creatures. They're lovely creatures. They have distinct personalities of an equine sort, and they form friendships just like we do. They have family bonds just like we do. There's a lot of things about them that is very resonant to people. And they hardly deserve to be treated like this. And yet in Tanakh, we see all kinds of treatment of humans and animals in ways that, at least to my sensibility here in 2023, in ways that I do not prefer. However, they do get redeemed in the end. Some of them clearly have survived this plague and are redeemed in a way. They're called out as being adorned by these special holy inscribed bells. And I find that very satisfying. I'm glad that happens with the horses. And then the third thing that jumps out at me about this Haftarah is the way that the formerly warring enemies come and inhabit the booths with us and celebrate the festival and ingathering of Sukkot with us. I think that is a very heartwarming vision of a hoped for messianic age. DeBarty, and I welcome any comments on this. Jay, do you want to go ahead now?
Yeah, I'm okay. So I'm not aware. I was not aware of this text, and notwithstanding your conclusion, which I have to think about again, my macro reaction is being incredibly depressed. You talk about messianic. To me, it's more apocalyptic. It's almost a Jewish version of the apocalypse, and especially within the current political context of Jerusalem, it's also depressing. But also, I'm wondering, and I have to read the text again. I think it's the survivors who celebrate in the Sukkah with us, and the text is almost genocidal in much of its implications. So I don't come away with a warm heart like you do. I'm really depressed by this text, and that's just a macro reaction.
Yeah. Jay, I have to tell you, I am a glass is 98 100% full kind of person. And so I do tend to read positively and very lovingly toward our text and thinking of them in the best possible light that I personally can imagine. That's
Yeah, well, that's a great comment, because I'm probably at the other extreme. And my favorite quote on that is an optimist believes this is the best of all possible worlds, and a pessimist fears they are right.
Love it. Miriam?
And Hatikva, hope is the anthem of the Jewish people, which is not optimism. Hope is different. So the thing that surprises me is the role of water, which is going to be very connected to the teaching that I'm going to be leading, and how during Messianic times the water will flow and not stop, and how that's related to light, where the Israelites live in a mountainous region where it's not like Egypt, where it's water from the grace of God, and a bracha is a rain, and Sukkot is the hoping and the praying for a good rainy season, because otherwise we won't have enough to eat. So I was very surprised that by Yom HaHu, that day is the day when the waters will flow from Jerusalem and not stop.
Thank you, Miriam. Does anyone else have any comments? Lori Schwartz. Okay, well, I guess Lori isn't unmuting. I don't have anything else. If someone would like to say something.
What was the chapter and verse? Can you
In the
repeat
room,
that?
people have their hands raised in the room.
Chapter
I'm unmuted.
14, chapter
I'm unmuted.
14 of Zechariah, and I did drop it into the chat.
Looks like people in the room have their hands raised, I thought.
Yes, that's right.
We're muted?
Oh,
No, you're not muted. That's why there's so much echoing. There's a whole
now,
bunch
Lori,
of
I'm going to
microphones
mute you
open.
online so that we don't get the reverbs. Please speak from the room. Oh, I'm sorry. I did too good a job.
I think we will need to have somebody unmute the room. It's not from the owl itself, it's from.
They should hear you now. Hello?
Oh, there you go.
Great. Perfect. Lori.
Okay, thank you. Wow, Beth, that was amazing. You know, for me, there's the parallel process, Jay. I guess what Beth is speaking to, for me, is kind of like what a lot of people are experiencing on planet Earth now, which is there's a schism, there's a split, you know, and what I loved about Rabbi David's sermon in the High Holidays is he talked about the tears, which is the water, which is when we do cry, we do come back to Yod He Vav He. We come back to love through the tears. And he also talked about I thou, meaning that if there's conflict between us, it's God that's between us. And if God is here, if Yod He Vav He is here, all conflicts can be resolved. And that for me is Beth's message, that whether you're depressed or anxious, all human emotions are what we're supposed to be releasing in our love for God, because it says, love the Lord our God with all our heart, not our emotions. So any emotion that I have, if I clear it between you and me, the waters flow. So I see it as hopeful, but that yes, there is good and evil, there is dark and light, and that according to my Zohar teacher, God created that so we could go down into the suffering and transmute the suffering to come back to Yod He Vav He, to serve each other. But we will never have compassion for the enemy unless we go deep into our own suffering and move through it. And that for me was the beauty of Yom Kippur this year with Rabbi David. I felt like He mentioned presence, tears, and the I thou relationship, and now the waters that are breaking. So, Beth, for me, your message is the message of how we should hold the space of time for ourselves as we walk into the future. And then the sukkah welcomes everybody to it, because on one level, we are all in the water. Devarti.
It's not cold.
Asher Chaim, I have a process question. Are we sort of doing the usual one comment per session, that's it? Or is it more conversation, which we sometimes do in the after party?
Well, we're not in the after party yet, and we have a lineup of people who have prepared Torah for us this morning. So either or, both and. I'll try not to rule with too heavy a hand. How's that?
Well, I'll wait for, because I would love to pursue this theme a bit more in terms of the text itself, but we may not have enough time, so I'll wait till the after party.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've covered Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, a little bit of Midrash, and Roberta, right now we are ready to hear the Torah that you bring us.
Thank you. Hag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom. Wow. Well, I feel so stimulated from what Beth just brought and from my responses and our responses. So I think I'd like to bring us into the heart of my drash by doing the practice that I was going to end my drash, which was just for a moment, let's all of us step into our Sukkot, step into a refuge of peace. And my reading of Leviticus and actually the 3 or 4 different sections in Torah that speak about Sukkot is that these shelters, right? They're not shelters for our physical bodies, right? What are they shelters for? And our liturgy answers that they are shelters for peace. So for a moment, let's just bring in everything we're feeling right now, maybe particularly how you feel about the Haftarah, and just bring it in, because what these Sukkot are, what these sukkahs are temporary, open, vulnerable, sort of physical places, but as Asher Hayim led us into, not exactly, right? There's something physical we're building, and it's completely subject to the wind and the rain. So just for a moment, imagine sitting in a sukkah, and maybe some of us are lucky enough to be sitting in a sukkah right now. I'm not. And bring in whatever has been stirred up from the Haftarah. Bring in maybe fear about the way people today might be reading it. Maybe amazement at where Beth took us with it, to the horses. Bring in the sirens. Everything is welcome. That is what this sukkah is constructed to be, a place of refuge. So what is the refuge right now that you want to call in? And call in something else. Just switch. Call in something else right now. Maybe it's someone on the screen who you don't always feel so connected to, or someone on the screen who you always feel connected to. We get to call in whatever we want, whatever will give us a sense of refuge. Call in aspects of Judaism that can really turn you off. It's so much like Yom Kippur, right? Where for a specific amount of time, we get to go way beyond our edges. So it's a refuge out of time, out of space, and in designated time and space. So we are just in this place of timeless time and spaceless space, as Shir HaShirim calls it. So call in something right now that's challenging for you to call in, and then sit with it. That's the ashrei. Like really sit with it, really welcome it. Oh, I'm calling in my fear at how so many people in the world interpret this beautiful, weird, startling Haftorah. Call in my fear. That's just what I'm doing right now. Because my fear exists in the world. I don't want to make it my enemy, right? I want to make it my friend. I want to give it a refuge. What happens when we give the things we fear a refuge? We expand ourselves. This is about the capacity for welcoming the elements in the desert. And I was thinking the ritual we do with the four parts of four different kinds of trees, right? Of shaking them in four directions. That when we do that, we could be doing the same thing. We could bow to the north and bring in what we usually cast out, and to the east and the west and the south. And I just wanted to offer that we take on a practice every day for these 7 or 8 days, depending on how you count that. 6 directions. Do we shake it to 6 directions? Yeah, above and below. Thank you. I'm really, yeah. I just want to put out one possible practice that every morning, and if you don't have the lulav and the etrog, that you just bow in the 6 directions outdoors. And every day pick 6 different emotions of yours, or people who usually annoy you. Phenomenon in the world. This morning I was trying this and I thought, I'm going to welcome climate catastrophe into my sukkah. I'm going to make it my friend so that I could really know it and get really close to it, experience what people are experiencing right here in New York City and Bangladesh and Myanmar, and like what happens when we befriend what we usually push away. what happens when we create refuge and space? What happens for me? What opens in me? So I started to list for myself categories that I want to bring in every day. And there's so many. I want to bring in and sit with impermanence and vulnerability, which are the characteristics of the Sukkah and also of Shabbat. And it's so beautiful that it's Shabbat and Sukkot. So we're in the timelessness of Shabbat, the placelessness of Sukkot, where we really create something permeable, vulnerable, impermanent. Can I bring
Thank
in
you.
and befriend impermanence? Can I bring in and befriend vulnerability?
Thank you, Roberta.
Okay, and just one more thing, that to bring in, I think we especially have the opportunity to befriend the parts of ourselves that we usually send into exile, because the Sukkah, and I'll finish with this, these were the structures we built to have a refuge in the midst of exile. So what can we call in from exile? And I don't have a source sheet, but I do have, I'll put in the chat, something I published that has a lot of these ideas in it, if anybody wants to see that. Thank you. Thank you, community. Thank you.
You've touched on the holy practice of Ushpizen, welcoming in.
Ken.
Ushpiz, which I was taught comes from the Latin, the same as hospice, hospitality, bringing in. And it's quite a challenge that you present us. As we indeed look towards Sukkot as the symbol of the eschaton, the ultimate, the end, Franz Rosenzweig speaks of the trajectory of history from creation through revelation towards redemption. And he links this to many things in the liturgy and also our holy cycle of seasons. Pesach is when our nation was birthed. Shavuot, the moment at Sinai of revelation. And Sukkot is the journey towards that promised land, through the wilderness, towards something that we have not yet reached, but towards which we are all striving. Hence Zechariah and the end of days that Beth commented on so beautifully. Miriam, you have also prepared Torah for us, I hope, and a source sheet that I will now try to pull up and put on the screen. Please.
Oh, thank you. I also put it in the chat.
Oh, it's right there. Beautiful.
Yeah. So good morning, Shabbat Shalom, from my very wet sukkah. So I'm looking for the connection to water, which there's so much of this time of year. But in Israel, it's been only the morning dew that's been collected. And I'm going to start with a Mishnah that connects Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to Sukkot. And I'm gonna chant it because that's how I learned it. Ba'arba'a perakim ha'olam nidon. At 4 times the world is judged. B'Pesach al ha'tevuah, on Pesach, about the grain harvest. Ba'atzeret al perot ha'ilan, and Shavuot on the fruit of the trees. B'Rosh Hashanah kol ba'eh ha'olam ovrim lefanav kivnei maron. On Rosh Hashanah, all creatures pass before God like sheep, as it is stated. Oh, I didn't do that part yet. Shene'amar hayotzer yachad libam. The Creator unites their hearts. Hamivin al kol ha'masehem. Who fashions their hearts as one. and who considers all of their doings. Overchag nidonin ahamayim. And correct me if I'm wrong, but nidonim means judgments. This is the day we're judged, because if we have been worthy, the rains will fall. And that kind of connects what we've been doing to what we are doing and the importance of water. And if at any time you have a comment, just raise your hand and jump on in. But what else is going on Sukkot? So first of all, it follows one of the 4 new years, and it is a day of judgment, because if we're good, the rains will fall. And if you think of the, and you gotta think, you can't think of rain as being bad. You got to think of it like Singing in the Rain. You ever watch that musical, Singing in the Rain? And they're, I'm dancing in the rain. I'm dancing in the rain. What a glorious feeling. I'm happy again. And so you don't mind if you get drenched in your sukkah. It means you'll live and you'll have enough food and water for the year. So you can't think of it the other way. But there's more going on to Sukkot than that. So let's see what more is going on to Sukkot than the water. And there's so much else interesting in that Mishnah, if you'd like to comment on it. So what I love about this verse from Nehemiah is that you have to go to the out of the towns and into the mountains. And one of the reasons I love Sukkot is because you got to go out of your house and into something that is more natural than your house. That's why I love it so much, because you have a real excuse to go do everything that you can do outside, right? Surrounded by grass and leaves and things like that. So Nehemiah, and they must announce and proclaim throughout all their towns, go out to the mountains and bring branches of the olive trees, of the pinea trees, the myrtles and the palms. It's actually the date palms and other leafy trees to make booths. So we're going to make our booths, at least the skach, right? Mine is a pop-up tent, but the skach is is natural. You can see the stars, because I got to make it myself. So I make pop-up trees. But I have some mums down here, mums and gourds all around, and I'm outside. So that's what I like about that Nehemiah verse. And finally, the joy. And if someone else would like to read the English, that would be fine. Or I guess the English, no reason to read the Hebrew if we don't need it. I don't, unless there's something specific I wanted to point out, I'll go right to the English. Anybody want to read it?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Sure. Sukkah 51a, Mishnah. One who did not see the celebration of the place of the drawing of the water never saw celebration in his days. This was the sequence of events. At the conclusion of the first festival, do you want me to read the whole thing?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. At the conclusion of the first festival day, the priests and the Levites descended from the Israelites' courtyard to the women's courtyard, where they would introduce a significant repair, as the Gemara will explain. There were golden candelabra atop poles there in the courtyard, and there were 4 basins made of gold at the top of each candelabrum. And there were 4 ladders for each and every pole, and there were 4 children from the priesthood trainees, and in their hands were pitchers with a capacity of 120 log of oil that they would pour into each and every basin. From the worn trousers of the priests and their belts, they would loosen and tear strips to use as wicks, and with them, we need to roll the writing up. Great, thanks. They would light the candelabra, and the light from the candelabra was so bright that there was not a courtyard in Jerusalem that was not illuminated from the light of the place of the drawing of the water.
What an interesting text. So much there. So first of all is the festival of, this is considered, these are the seasons of our joy. That's literally what we call Sukkot. It is the happiest season of the year, the most joyous, which is maybe why Zechariah predicted that that would be the time of the coming of the Messiah. One who didn't see the celebration, never saw celebration in his days. So that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah was made, the Mishnah was developed by the rabbis after the Galut, the exile, to make the celebration understandable in their days, but something was not understandable. What's the repair that the priests would introduce? So there were levels of courtyards, and the Levites descended from the Israelites' courtyard to the women's courtyard, where they would introduce a significant repair. What's that repair? Maybe it's the repair of the inequality of women, or the not considering of children. But what I do know is that repair will bring light, and will also take the bloody linens of the priests, and they're going to take them into strips and make them into something that can bring light. So maybe it's a repair from, this is an important time where they take animals and turn it into meat for that the people will have for the winter. But also that's a bloody process. And this repair will take those robes and burn them in the creation of light. So we're going to connect water and light. We're going to make a repair, maybe between the sexes, maybe between the castes or the levels of Israelites. Because it's a raising up, but it's also a coming down, which is interesting. Water always comes down, but we ascend spiritually on these days, which we'll get to. Yeah, the last comments here, but we have one more. We have one more Baraita first, I think. Cites a discussion of opinions about Rabbi Eliezer. It says the four species, the lulav and the other species, come only to offer appeasement for waters. Now, what I had learned is they're actually a very ancient sign. The willow is often used as, what do they call it when they go searching for water when you...
divining, I think.
Right, divining for water. So the willow is often seen as something like that. And these are all species that cannot exist without water. But I love this comment. So too the world cannot exist without water. Therefore, it is proper to mention rain in one's prayers when taking the four species. Also, it's a fertility symbol, both for the fields and for the babies, because the palm is quite phallic and the etrog is the womb. And I want to share a little bit of spiritual teaching. So the water is coming down, the priests are coming down, but spiritually we go up. And that's the last comment on the sheet that I share, but I'll read that. And this is from my teacher, Rob Ori Gennaro. From here, we see a more spiritually lofty and public level of simcha on Sukkot. So we can be joyful for our own family celebrations. We can be joyful at any time. But here we're commanded to be joyful. This is the official season of joy for all of the Israelites. It is no wonder that the Talmud Yerushalmi explains that the word shoeva refers to the drawing not just of water, but of Ruach HaKodesh, divine spirit, that was made possible through simcha. So when we're joyous, it brings down divine spirit. Our own joy can reflect and bring down divine spirit, and Shekhinah can dwell among us. And we'll know it because we'll get rain. And in the Zohar, one final connection between spirituality and water. And this is from Malila Helner Eshed's introduction to A River Flows Through Eden, which is a book about the Zohar. The Zohar is the spiritual, the mystical book, the classic mystical book of the Jewish people. In the Zohar, the jewel in the crown of Jewish mystical literature, the verse from Genesis 2:10, a river flows from Eden to water the garden, first of all, separates Eden and the garden, which is an interesting statement, symbolizes the river of divine plenty that unceasingly flows from the depths of divinity into the garden of reality. Zoharic heroes, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his disciples, embark upon many wondrous spiritual adventures in the Zohar, sharing their enhanced experience of the living presence of the divine and the Zohar's great call to awaken human consciousness. And so on Sukkot, we're not just joyous for ourselves, but we any place that there are hungry people in the 6 directions, we give tzedakah, we take our joy and we share it. If our hearts are overflowing with love and joy, like those waters that we talked about, you can't but share it. You can't but share it with others. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you.
Mm.
Just as on Shabbat, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, our shofar was silent, so today, the first day of Sukkot, we do not lift up the etrog and lulav. We perform the practice in our minds and in our hearts, even when we do not perform it with our hands. Shabbat gives us limitations, and it also challenges us to opportunities. You mentioned Eden, the garden, and I don't know if Eden, our beloved friend, is in the room, since I can't see clearly into the room, but if someone could please signal me, if Eden is in the room, I believe she has prepared Torah. But first, I would like to take a moment of discretion. Just as we do not sound the shofar on Shabbat, and just as we do not lift up the etrog lulav on Shabbat, similarly, there is a holding back at a time of loss. And at least traditionally, we do not formally offer condolences until after a funeral, and Kaddish as well. The time before a funeral is a very difficult in-between time, where there is not much to say, other than to be present this Shabbat, this Sukkot, to be present with Gloria and with Jamie, who have suffered the loss of a husband and a father, dearly, dearly beloved by family and all who knew him. And on this Shabbat and this Sukkot before the funeral, there is a silence, but we hope a presence that can offer some support.
May I say a word?
Please, who is this, please?
It's Batya.
Batya, please.
Thank you. I just want to mention that water is a symbol of the Shekinah. And it feels like now is the time that we've gone through all the suffering and coming out pure and holy, that we are able to give love more freely to each other and ourselves.
Oh,
Amen.
amen.
Tomas has joined us in the Zoom world rather than in the room. And at this point, Tomas, I believe that your inner architect had some commentary on the Sukkah. If you are ready to teach, we are more than ready to listen.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm sorry that I can't join my compatriots in the room. I got defeated by the subway. It's a real privilege to hear these voices today. And there are so many intersections and also such diversity of seeking in what we've already heard. And I really look forward to trying to weave this all together in my head over the balance of the day and of the holiday. Sukkot is, for me as an architect, obviously my most favorite holiday of all, because it involves making architecture. And it was first described to me as someone who didn't grow up to it. I was like, it was my first Jewish holiday. And I remember asking my interlocutor, like, what is a sukkah? I had no idea. And she really thought about it. and how to communicate it in a way that would be legible to me. And she said, okay, think of it as a Christmas tree you can live in. and I was like, ooh, this is the religion for me, right? Because the Christmas tree is this bizarre ritual, really pagan in a sense, 19th century sort of German that was adopted into British tradition thanks to the Victorians. Of bringing a tree into your house, right? Kind of the equal and opposite gesture of the sukkah, taking a piece of wilderness, the evergreen, right? Summer and winter, nighttime during daytime, dissolving some of these binaries and boundaries with which we otherwise order our lives, and bringing in this crazy piece of nature into your house. And in the 19th century, lighting it with fire, with candles. So it really was a wild, wild piece of the forest that you brought into domestic space. And it was very much a family ritual. And so the idea of not only decorating the Christmas tree, but also somehow being able to dwell in it, it's very exciting to me as an architect. I was very devoted to this. And there's a project called Sukkah City that I helped establish with my friend Joshua, for those of you who want to seek in that direction. I think from the architectural side, the gentle reminder of the sukkah is something that we've already heard from many of our speakers today, which is this vulnerability, this permeability, this establishing of a boundary that is precisely not a hard one, but is actually a soft one, where light comes through, stars come through, the rain comes through, and tolerating the ambiguity. Am I exposed or am I enclosed? Am I inside? Am I outside? Is it daytime or nighttime, as in this very striking Haftorah text? And even though it is also a time of joy, no joy is without melancholy, either in nostalgia or anticipation. And the emotions are complementary. And just as a great mind can hold two thoughts at once, so hopefully can a great heart hold two feelings. And lastly, as we think about this structure of the so-called booth, the humble sukkah, the language with which we use in reference to these structures, the Sukkot is the great grounding, right? The great homecoming, the great return, in a way, from the solemn heights of the high holidays, and is in a sense, like the Christmas tree, a domestication, a coming back to the kitchen table from the mountaintop, as it were, or from the court of judgment. At least that's the way that the tradition is often practiced today. And it can seem that it is important to make a distinction between those very high holy places and times and this more domestic, friendly festival of mellow abundance, as autumn is called. But I think the language has a little key to it, because so much comes to us through translation, through Latin, and often the influence of the King James Bible of 1611, and through this Christian echo and reflection of the so-called Old Testament. And we have the word tabernacle and we have the word booth. And the distinction between those two places was exaggerated by English translation. And often the Feast of Booths could as easily be translated as the Feast of Tabernacles. And the tabernacle, of course, being the Mishkan, the extraordinarily holy precursor to the temple. And the translators in 1611, who were responsible for the so-called Old Testament, there were about 27 of them. And chief among them was a convert from Judaism, an Italian who found his way to Oxford. And he thought, what do we call the Mishkan in English? And basically this word, like the word atonement, interestingly, which was invented for this translation, at one meant becoming one with the divine, because these Protestant Christian translators were very uncomfortable with the idea of cleansing and cleaning, which I understand is closer to the Hebrew original. So they invented this word, atonement. And the word tabernacle is also in some ways an invention, because in the Latin and Roman tradition, there was something called the tabernaculum, which was a temporary little booth, a strange little tent used by priestesses, constructed beyond the holy place of the temple for only a brief time, a festival of several days, in which they engaged in prophecy, because there was something so spooky and strange about prophecy that somehow even the temple wasn't holy enough for it, at least the everyday temple. So beyond the stone columns and the solid roof of a kind of Roman temple in your imagination, these priestesses primarily, interestingly that it was a gendered space, would construct a mysterious little tent, which was called the tabernaculum, taverna. You can hear the word tavern there too. And so in the experience of these translators, this was like the closest thing, this strange, temporary, beyond the holy place site of prophecy and divination, going back to the idea of water. And they said, okay, the Moses one, it must have been one of these. So it was the closest word, but also could as easily be translated as booth. And so I would just end with the thought that this place of extreme holiness and otherness, the Mishkan or the tabernacle, has this intimate relationship with this other temporary construction, both through the history of translation and the tolerance of ambiguity in translation. Is it day or is it night? As Asher Chaim might say, it's both and. And so when we are in the sukkah, we are always already in the Mishkan. When we are in the booth, we are always already perhaps in the sukkah, and that these two places are the same place, and that these seeming binaries actually hold each other, like day holds night and night holds day, and we can kind of tolerate that ambiguity between knowledge and ignorance, between certainty and uncertainty, between inside and outside. So that's my little take on the architecture and the language. And thank you for today and for this self-organization. It's an amazing group of people. We already knew that. So this is a beautiful case study in that practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomas. All too often, we in the Zoomagogue complain bitterly that we're not being noticed by the people in the room. And right now, I hope that the people in the room are not feeling slighted. Let me spotlight the room for a moment. Are there comments from the room that you would like to share on the Torah you've heard or on other topics? Yes, please. And since you're not wearing a Zoom name tag, please tell us your name before you start to teach us.
Malka has been trying to speak for a long time. Nahama,
Yes, I don't want to break into this beautiful interpretation of the tabernacles of booths, but I see and Zechariah in the handout these terrible things about people who prophesized and you should kill them and parents should kill them. What is that about? Why are we looking at it?
My guess, just to indulge in a little bit of history, is that the Roman state religion, the what we would call pagan, its greatest virtue was not do unto others. We can thank Judaism for that. Its greatest virtue was stoic acceptance of suffering. And its greatest practice was not at one meant with the divine. Its greatest practice was this idea of prophecy and divination, of peering into the future. And so the religious rituals of the Roman Empire.
We're losing your audio, Thomas.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Better.
So my guess is that really may be culturally situated, because these like the Roman priestess in her strange tabernaculum was just trying to see into the future. And so much of Roman pagan religious ritual was organized about insight into the future. And I think that these cautions against fortune telling may have somehow been culturally situated and historically situated as resistance to that tradition, as Judaism, through its radically successful heretical sect of Christianity, supplanted these prior traditions as the Roman state religion. That would be my guess from a historical point of view.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nikki, I guess channeling what I hear Rabbi Diane say so often, we look at these texts and we wrestle with these texts because these are the texts that we have to wrestle with. We don't have to accept them at face value, but we always have to interpret and reinterpret and figure out how a world has changed and our understanding of them has changed, while at the same time saying, this is where we came from, and there is much that we have to learn. And also, I guess, Roberta inviting the unpleasant texts into our sukkah. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was a hand raised in the room. Yes, please. Tell us your name.
Hi. My name is Rob Rimberg. And we live in a time, the economy is horrible, climate change is horrible, crime is horrible, all these horrible things that kind of came from COVID in the last few years for a lot of people have been terrible. And this particular time of year, Sukkot, is called Zaman Simchatenu. So there is a divine imperative, no matter what else is going on in the world, no matter what terrible things we have to look forward to before the holiday or after the holiday, during this time of year, there is a divine imperative to be happy. Don't worry, be happy.
Amen.
Amen.